The Rover 75, a car that I have loved and hated since its release, and know quite a bit about because of this. This one's fine though. Yeah! What's that? The Rover 75 Buyer's Guide. Between the years of 1998 and 2005, the Rover 75 was in production, and nobody complained about its looks. With good reason. With its retro looks and stylish design, the 75 promised to be the ultimate Rover. Looks and broken promises aside, let's talk about what to look out for with buying one of these. In front of me is a late registered 2005 diesel variant in saloon. So let's talk about this one and then the others afterwards. The Rover 75 was the premium car of the marque, teamed up with BMW, did all the suspension. They had their hand in an awful lot of aspects to this car. Unfortunately, it's those BMW parts that somewhat let it down. See this here? That's a nice big piece of carpet. And if you're thinking of buying a Rover 75 or an MG ZT, I advise you take a nice big piece of carpet. Carpet is your friend. Unfortunately, the worst thing you can have go wrong with one of these happens around the rear with BMW's Z-axle. Many a neglected Rover 75 are suddenly collapsed in the back where the spring cups go through part of the suspension due to corrosion. The arms and all the fiddly bits that are underneath there are all prone to rotting and falling apart. But it's an expensive repair and it's not easy to do. So unless you are a proper mechanic with ramps and stuff like that, I'd make sure that you check that bit out. The suspension on the front isn't as bad for corrosion, but it is as bad for things just falling apart. Drop links is the main thing, track rod ends, bottom ball joints, every connection underneath there, every bit of suspension is unfortunately just a bit vulnerable. And I've only ever driven 2 Rover 75s that are okay. On the early cars in particular, you need to look out for corrosion along the sills because they do suddenly go through. This one here, for example, has just started with a little hole. But whatever you do, don't use the jacking points to find out whether the corrosion's happening. You'll end up with the jack going straight through it and the car going straight on top of you. And that won't be pleasant. I came very close to experiencing that myself. Whilst enjoying yourself underneath the Rover 75, do make a point of checking the fuel tank straps as well, because they can be somewhat crusty. The interior of the Rover 75 is a lovely place to be. It's a very well thought out bit of retro design. Even on a late model like this, where the real wood dash was actually replaced with plastic, it still looks really rather classy. But again, we're going into an opinion there, which this video isn't all about. Some models have a digital dash just there, which is prone to pixelating. The dash itself is reasonably well put together, but very often you'll find a little crack just there or just there. Most of the time you can expect a saggy headlining and the rear interior light to be absent. Most of the Rover 75s have a climate control panel there, which always works, as does this. But then what doesn't normally work are the cup holder. You have one cup holder and it doesn't work. Doesn't work. Although a very rare edition, you'll find 2 cup holders that don't work. That one and this, which in this car and in most of them is just a blank space. Just a bit cheap really. In the back though there is another cup holder. And that one does work. The first thing to mention and to look out for is the rather annoying door cards. But before we get to that, and something that does affect all of them as well, window regulators. Not the actual motors, but how the window is heaved up and down. You see they're on cables, and on the driver's side in particular, the cable, with lots of use, stretches, starts to fray, and suddenly your window doesn't work any longer. I'm sure you'll agree, that's not really the end of the world. But the door actuators and locks as well can fail, and you can end up with one door that doesn't lock or unlock. Common issue. having to manually open the door from the inside. And there are two reasons why you may one day have to take the door card off of your Rover 75. And that is where we have another problem. Fit using just a couple of screws, and the rest of them are clips. And the worst part is, this top part here never seems to want to line up. That's annoying, isn't it? They don't like to go back together properly. So as you drive along, you can hear this squeaking going on, which is a bit annoying. The only solution really is push it, give it a slap like that, and it goes back into place. All you need to do is open and close the door a few times, and there we go, it's back again. As well as windows that don't like to go up and down because the regulator's broken, the switches can be vulnerable because these are cheap and nasty switches. Door rubbers often fall apart. A minor point, but worthwhile pointing out. It is a shame that they cut corners on so many little details because the rest of the car is really nice. And there is some genuine premium feel about the doors when you open them up. Look at that, a solid door. You close it, what a lovely sound. Same with the rears. But let's not forget something. This is a Rover, and unfortunately, you may find it to be a bit damp on the inside. Oh, so you've bought yourself a Rover, have you? Very nice. Does it smell of cabbages? What I'm about to talk about here is a problem for all of the Rover 75s again, and it involves the inside and the outside. If your car has a sunroof, make sure it doesn't leak, because they do. They can leak down here and go straight into the footwell and destroy bits inside there. Underneath the scuttle panel there, the ECU is kept, and that can end up soaked in water because the drains get blocked. Drains get blocked, the windscreen leaks, you end up with water in the carpet. Lots of water, because there's a great big thick bit of sponge underneath the carpet there that soaks it up for quite a long time before you notice that that smell is being caused by ingress. Slightly gunked up like this because there's been some evidence of it leaking. Not only that, the rear lamps tend to leak. The boot seal itself has a tendency to leak. Great if you like water in your car, not so much if you don't. And listen to that, another good quality door shut sound, this time being the boot. Just under here, we can find the bonnet release. Those can go wrong. We also find the boot release. Those go wrong. Yep, didn't work. Underneath the bonnet we find the cable and a junction box. Oh! Ow! Ow! That was a point I was about to get to before it did it all by itself. The bonnet is kept open with two gas struts right in the corner there, and they're not particularly strong. In fact, they're only really just about good enough to keep the bonnet open. So if you get a bit of snow on the bonnet or it's a bit windy, you could end up with this thing crashing down onto your bonds while you work underneath it. That's going to hurt. This means that you can't work under the bonnet of your car if it's raining or if it's windy or if you're facing downhill. Worse than that, you imagine having your fingers there and this comes down, that's going to cut your fingers off with the weight of that bonnet. So basically, be aware. Be aware indeed. More minor niggles. These matte black parts on here can rust from the inside and suddenly they fall apart. Lack appeal on newer models is a particular problem, as well as faded headlamps. The newer the model, the more likely they are to fade. Driver's side window. Now can we see that there? We have lots and lots of little scratches. It does seem to have a particularly good seal there, so any amount of grit that's on the glass will just scratch the glass. I think that's an awful lot of effort to go to make sure that water doesn't get in the door, especially when it gets in everywhere else. So far, all of the problems I've pointed out are across the board, whether it's the saloon, whether it's the estate, whether it's the limo, whether it's an early and sought after Cowley model, or whether it's one of these Longbridge models like this. The early models are much more sought after than the later ones, quite simply because they were built better. That's really it. It still has a bit of nice car left, but the car from 7 years previous was just nicer. The original Rover 75 was luxurious. It wouldn't have looked out of place parked outside a stately home, whereas this one, more like the overgrown lawn of a council estate. The 1998 model would have been the car that the aspiring middle class would have used to go to a fancy restaurant. This one, driven by the kind of man that eats biscuits. The touring model, such as this, one of the best examples of turning a saloon into an estate. These sturdy roof bars, slightly longer overhang, and proper handsome looks. However, due to the rather crap way that they design these rear lamps, that's what they do. They fall apart on the inside and then suddenly they're worth a fortune. So try and buy one that hasn't got broken rear lamps. What about engines then? Which one is best? Which one should you choose? Well, let's start at the bottom. The 1.8 K series. It's a good engine, and although I am happy with the 1.8 K series, I think it's good, but it wouldn't stop me from just making sure that it hasn't been abused. The K series is looked after, all fine and super dandy, but do your checks. You need to make sure that there isn't any mixing of coolant and oil, that it isn't pressurising, because although they are a good engine, they do need to be looked after. The K series engine is a bit like a dog. If you look after it and love it, it will love you back. But if you don't, if you kick it, it will kick you back. Or it'll kick somebody else. And then we have exactly the same thing with the 1.8 turbo, because it's under even more strain. And the MG version in particular has a bit more power, but it's not enough to make it a fast car. But it is enough to make it an abused car. So personally, although the 1.8 may feel quicker than the KV6, I don't think it's the right choice. An engine that I definitely don't recommend though is the 2-litre KV6. It sounds fantastic, but it's underpowered and there's not enough torque. 140 brake horsepower for a car that weighs as much as one of these do, it's not a good match. Although the automatic gearboxes are good, they do take away a bit of its power. The 2.5-litre KV6 is much more suitable for this car. It's got a lot more torque, it's got a lot more power, something like 170 brake horsepower for the 75 version, and then the MG version can have either 180 or 190. The ZT190 is not a particularly quick feeling car though, because again the power has been pushed to the top end and you won't be satisfied with the fuel economy at all. Neither of the KV6 engines are known for head gasket failure. You can have an issue with leaky thermostats which sit at the top of the engine and you have to take all the inlet manifold off to get to them. A leaky thermostat, that can obviously mean coolant disappearing, which with any engine can lead to a head gasket failure. It's more the fuel economy, the awful fuel economy, and the cost of the servicing with the belts, 3 timing belts, and ideally the engine has to come out to do it. Yeah, I like the engine, but I don't think I wouldn't really want one myself. Then we get on to the big one, the V8, the Mustang 4.6. That's why it has the transmission tunnel running through the car, which takes up an awful lot of space. As a choice, I can't see the V8 being a particularly good one either, because it's obviously going to be very heavy on fuel. The people that I know that have driven them have said they've been a bit underwhelmed by the power, or the road tax as well. The immense road tax. The only thing the V8's got going for it really is the sound. I'd have to be a bit cruel to recommend one of those. So what's left is the diesel, and that's the BMW M47 engine, which has been considered one of the most reliable engines BMW have ever made. It's not particularly exciting, it's not particularly powerful, it's not got a big turbo on it. They didn't do a Rover 75 super diesel like they did for their own cars. I mean, it would have been nice if they'd boned in the 3-litre diesel like they had in the 5 Series and the 3 Series. That would have suited this really well. But they didn't, of course, and so that isn't an option. But instead the M47, but it works better with the automatic gearbox. And 131 brake horsepower, or 115 for some of the early models, it's not really going to excite you particularly. The most useful thing you can have about any car is reliability. And so the diesel automatic is definitely the one to go for, because the diesel is the most reliable of all of the engines. If you can forget about the issues that they have with the bottom pulley, they can sometimes give up, and the front springs do suffer with having the extra weight, then they're fine. And the automatic gearbox means that you don't have clutch issues, because there's another thing that they can have: clutch issues, slave cylinder issues, master cylinder issues. So my conclusion is the best Rover 75 you can have would be an early model, non-facelift, pre-project drive 75 not ZT diesel automatic Tourer, and ideally one that's a bit rough around the edges so that it doesn't become precious. You know, a few scratches here and there, a bit of dodgy paint work, you know, missing headlining, that kind of thing.